Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, and locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class today. You know, we have correspondents in the United States, Canada, Central America, Europe, and Australia. And Guineith Isaacs is live with us in Australia. Welcome, Guineith Isaacs.
Hello, Vincent. How are you this morning?
I am really well. I'm delighted to hear your voice. It's great to be broadcasting with you. And you've got some information that you'd like to share with us. Isn't that correct?
Yes. I have just finished a book project. I have just published my first novel, and it is for sale on Amazon.com. And I think I'll provide you, if I haven't already done so, I'll provide you with a link to my Amazon page, and you can put it on the USA Prepares page. Because
I'd be glad to do that.
It's been a lot of fun for me writing this novel, and it's really good, if I do say so myself. There are also the people that I have given the novel to read and review.
Yeah.
Who said that it's a page turner and that they want more.
Mm-hmm. From what I've read of your novel, it is exactly that. It is a page turner, and it's very, very well written as the finest novel I have ever seen or heard of. No question about it. And it's not because I'm not saying this because I like you. I'm not saying this because I'm an instructor. I'm saying it because it's true.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for that. That is a high compliment indeed. The origins of this novel, okay, on a purely natural level, okay, I have been reading classical novels since I was a little girl. The first novel that I ever read when I was 9 years old was The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, so classic Sherlock Holmes. And my dad he was a good old-fashioned dad. You know what he used to do every single week? He used to say, okay, Jenny, it's time for the library. And he used to take me to the library every week. And he used to let me loose on the library, and I was allowed to borrow any book that I wanted. And once I remember, I would have been about 11 or 12 years old at this other time, and I borrowed a book about Hindu philosophy and meditation. And the librarian said something like, oh, that's a bit advanced for her, isn't it? And Dad said, listen, if she understands it, well, that's all well and good. If she doesn't, she'll soon put it down. And, you know, something that is that is a really, really good philosophy to have regarding children and reading, and I don't think that children are encouraged enough to read. Now, that said, this is not a children's novel, okay? It is erotic romance fiction, and it's the thing of people have forgotten how to have love affairs. They have forgotten how to be devoted to each other. And, you know, Vincent, I've been very, very fortunate in my life that I met the man that I met, because we were two people, I believe, who were absolutely meant to meet on this earth. And I remember just before I met my husband, Archie, I was working in a job doing door knocking for a local charity, which is basically going around from door to door. They had hired me to go from door to door and knock on people's doors and talk about the charity and ask for a donation. And that was my job. And I remember one day, just before I met Archie, and I just sat on the curb and I absolutely just cried, because I said, God, I know that there is somebody on this earth that you mean me to meet, and I have no idea who it is or where he is, and I just asked for you to show him to me. And I had no idea. I was really, really in fear of having to live my life on my own. And I think that that's a problem that a lot of people are facing today, is that, you know, and many of them will never meet the one that they were meant to be with, because for a variety of reasons. For one thing, you know, one in 3 or 1 in 4 babies is killed before it leaves the womb. That's a big problem. I've mentioned on this broadcast before, it pulls fabrics out of the thread of the universe when that happens. But what happened just after this was that maybe a day or two later, was that I was knocking on this door, and this man answered the door. And he was one of the nicest, the sweetest, and kindest guys I've ever met. And what happened was, I asked him for a donation, and I think he had 25 cents in the house. And then I thanked him, and then I went and turned away to go to the next door, to the next house, and he said, would you like a cup of tea? And I initially I said, oh no, I'll be fine, thanks. And you know, something later he said that when I said that, his heart just about died on the inside of him right there. But the Holy Spirit spoke on that still small voice. If you follow that voice, it'll always lead you in the right track. It spoke and it said, go and have a cup of tea with this man. And I said, I turned around and I said, actually, I think I will go and have that cup of tea with you. And I went and had a cup of tea with him, and that, of course, was my beloved Archie, and that's how we met. And there were a lot of things I didn't know about Archie at the time. He was a lovely guy. We soon fell in love. We instantly connected. And although it was about 6 months before we were actually a couple. But, you know, when two people meet and they're meant to be together, there's some sort of chemistry that happens. And when that happens, it should never, ever be ignored. And if there's anybody out there in the class that, you know, has experienced this, they know exactly what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you didn't realize at the time that that offer for a cup of tea was a marriage proposal, right?
I had no idea. I had no idea. It was just the still small voice of the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, go and have a cup of tea with this man. Now, as I mentioned, there were a lot of things about Archie at the time that I didn't know. And one of them was that he was a gangster. He was a lifelong gang member and gang leader who, at the age of 12, in Glasgow, was the second in command of one of the biggest gangs in the city, a gang of 4,000 men. Now, this was not a child's gang. This was a full-on adult men gang. We're talking about the level of gang warfare that you might see on a movie such as Gangs of New York. And practically every weekend, his weekends, when he was a young person, were filled with gang warfare of a most violent nature. Okay, I didn't know any of this, but what I could see was here is one of the nicest, sweetest, and kindest men that I had ever seen. He was in desperate need of help. He had 5 small children. He had a schizophrenic, estranged wife, and his house, it was a 2-bedroom terrace house. It was tiny, and within about a month or two, I had moved into the house, and when I moved in, there were 10 people living in the house. There was himself, there was his estranged wife that he didn't have the heart to kick her out because he knew that it would be bad for her. And he had an adult son and an adult adopted son, and then there were the 5 children. And, and then there was me. So, and I was in my final year of university, and, I was just about on the point of throwing in my university degree. And it was actually Archie that encouraged me to finish university. And you might wonder what all this has to do with my novel. Well, I think we've got the music coming.
Yeah, and we've got...
we'll go into a bit more detail after the break.
Okay, and we've got Mark in Illinois on hold, and I think he wants to talk to you about New Zealand. We'll be right back. Guineith Isaacs is with us live in Australia. Mark in Illinois, you're on the air with Guineith Isaacs.
Yeah, hi, Guineith. Hey, I've got a question for you about New Zealand. There is a place called Wanga Momona in King Country of New Zealand. And when you were a little girl, did you celebrate anything called Anzac Day? It's ANZAC.
Yes,
Anzac Day. Do you celebrate that?
Yep. That's our Memorial Day.
Okay, and it says something about
remember fallen soldiers.
Yeah, the fallen soldiers that actually captured Jerusalem in 1917, right? Do you remember that?
I think that it actually was. Yeah, I think that it actually was.
Yeah, and it says there's an
they were the ones who took it away from the Ottomans, from the Turks.
Yeah, from the Turks. Yeah,
who were running the show at the time.
I was stationed in Ramallah with British forces not too long back ago, and I remember, there's talking about this Anzac, where these they had horses. The horses came from New Zealand, and they were a cross between a whaler and what was that other one? A Brumby. Do you know about those horses? Did you see any of those wild horses when you were in New Zealand?
I think when I was a little girl, I actually did, because we went for a camp. I used to be in the Girls' Brigade when I was a little girl, and we used to go for camps sometimes. And this particular time we went for a camp in a place called Te Wairoa. There's a few places called Te Wairoa in New Zealand, but one of them actually is the centre of the North Island. Where you're talking about the King Country is a known horse breeding area. Some of the best race horses in the whole world have been bred there, including Farlap, incidentally, and which is probably the best horse the Antipodes have ever produced. But that particular cross of a Brumpy with a Whaler is probably going to be a really, really good horse. And I know the horses that I saw, the wild horses that I saw at Te Wairoa when I was a little girl, were absolutely beautiful. And they came right up to the house that we were staying in and basically looked in the windows. And but they were completely wild. There wasn't anything domestic about them, but they were just curious. Now, Te Wairoa is known as well as, there's a ski resort nearby, but as well as that, there's also a military base nearby. It's one of the biggest military bases in New Zealand, so it's perfectly conceivable that somebody was told to take the cavalry horses out the back and shoot them and just didn't have the heart to do it and let them go.
Yeah, they had the cavalry horses. They left a lot of these cavalry horses in Jerusalem, in Palestine, in 1918. They didn't bring them back, and I think that they had orders to shoot them, but I don't know if they did shoot them all.
They probably let them go.
They let them go. Okay. So there's actually probably some horse ranches over there that actually still have this horse over there. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Hey, have you ever heard of somebody called Australian poet called Angel Pedersen?
Yes, very famous poet. He's our national poet. And he's very famous for writing a number of poems, including Waltzing Matilda. And there's also another one which is called The Man from Snowy River. And, we actually do have alpine regions in this country. It's not all hot and dry. Although the mountains that we have here are not as tall as mountains that they have in other parts of the world, even so, they're tall enough to be covered in snow every winter. That's what they call the Snowy Mountains.
All right. Hold that thought. Mark, thank you so much for being with us today. Guineith Isaacs is with us. Guineith, during the bottom of the hour commercial break, I was preparing the post to... Okay. It looks like we just lost Guineith Isaacs, and she'll be back in just a couple minutes. I wanted to thank Sharon in Montana for letting us know that we actually can dehydrate kale. So we have a Nesco dehydrator. It's this cylindrical type dehydrator with multiple trays. And what I did was I thoroughly washed the kale and then cut it into small pieces and then placed it on the racks of the dehydrator. And we have one screen. There's a rack with large openings in it, and then we have just one rack with a very tight screen. And so what I did was I placed the screen on the bottom of the stack so that if little tiny pieces of kale, as they dehydrated, would drop down, they'd be caught by that screen. And for probably close to 6 to 8 hours on a very low temperature, we ran the dehydrator. It's an electric dehydrator, and it uses a resistive element to heat the air. And so I dehydrated it, and last night, Mrs. Finelli and I made sub sandwiches, and we put some dehydrated kale and lettuce and some meat on a very small amount of bread, because we're trying very hard not to eat bread. and it was absolutely delicious. And so I'm putting the note in the book that I'm working on about how to dehydrate kale and what it looks like before, during, and after. So I'm going to store it in some airtight jars, and it'll be labeled, and I think it's going to work out just fine because so far it really has. And I wanted to thank Sharon for that advice and counsel that she provided on the air. I've got a couple other items that I'm adding to the book, and I'm just kind of looking at them. One of the things that I was working on the last few days was using ammo cans, 50 caliber and 30 caliber ammunition cans. And you can use them for all kinds of things. This is another thing that I'm going to be talking about. These are some items that are in the book. And so these ammo cans, I used to be able to buy them for about $3 a piece. They keep going up and up. And I use them for all kinds of things. So you can use a 50 caliber ammo can to store silver if you want it. And if you have a lot of silver, you can literally store 1,000 silver dollars, U.S. silver dollars, in one of these 50 caliber ammo cans. And what's really nice is if you have ammunition, they have a gasket around them. They're a metal can with a strap handle, and you'll be able to carry them with you. And they're pretty darn waterproof. I don't know if you can submerge them in 30 feet of water and have them be waterproof, but they are certainly water resistant. And there's nothing that you can buy, nothing that I've found, that's as good for storing things and keeping them out of water and moisture than ammo cans. And I'm talking about U.S. military surplus ammo cans. The same ones that Hillary Clinton wanted to make sure that they were crushed and would not be available to you. Guineith is back with us. Guineith, so the question I had is, you were talking about Archie, you were talking about his former gang life in Glasgow, and you were talking about the 4,000 men that he had under him. And how was that pre-marriage life tied to your newest book?
Okay. Well, it wasn't long before he began talking about how he was the reincarnation of somebody that he called the teetotaling pirate king. And we didn't have a name for this pirate king at the time, okay? Apparently that gave him the talent for gang leadership. And I'll tell you what, he was in this life, he was the strangest gang leader that you would ever meet. And we knew nothing about Bartholomew Roberts at this time, okay? I had not studied anything about the history of Caribbean piracy, but he, in this life, he became a Christian, and he went to Bible college, and he became an ordained minister, Pentecostal minister. And he would hold church services he bought a mission in Fitzroy, and it happened to be next to the Hells Angels headquarters. And he would hold church services for the gangsters every Sunday in his mission, and he would preach the gospel to them. And, afterwards, I said, it became apparent afterwards, because I do have the second sight, and I sort of discerned that maybe his gang leadership wasn't quite as much in the past while he was doing this sort of thing. This was before I knew him, that he had the mission. When I knew him, he didn't have the mission anymore. But I'd seen that when he had the mission, that maybe he still had some gang involvement and activities. And but anyway, he kept talking about being the teetotaling pirate king. And frankly, I didn't believe him. I said, that's a ridiculous idea. And I said, okay, well, I'll agree to do some past life regression. And we saw that I was I was his lover in that life, and that I was a surgeon, and that I lived in his cabin with him, and that we were very much in love. And like I said, this was years before I did any research into the history of piracy. And, you know, I've got it posted on my Facebook page where there's a man by the name of Richard Sanders, and in 2007 he published a book called If a Pirate I Must Be. And this is around about 9 years that this book was published, about 9 years after we began doing this sort of past life regression work. And, you know, there were other sources out there, but I hadn't read any of them. And Archie was saying, listen, you've got to study this to see if there's anything to it. And I says, oh, yes, I will one day. But in the meantime, I had 5 stepchildren. And within, you know, at the time I thought I was barren, but in time I became pregnant, and then I had a little baby of my own, and then a second baby, and those are my 2 sons that I have. They, you know, but what happened was after he died, I went into a state of grief, and I went on Google one day and I just typed in teetotaling pirate king, just out of grief. And I found out about Bartholomew Roberts. And that's what he's actually called. He's called the teetotaling pirate king. And that he did have a lover. His lover was a surgeon, lived in his cabin with him, and they were, the surgeon is called, his name was called George Wilson, and he is always referred to in the historical texts as being the intimate friend of Bartholomew Roberts. There was something else that we saw in the past life regression work that we did when he was still alive. And like I say, the timeline when we were doing this work was from 1998 until he died in 2003. So it was over a period of about 5 years that we were doing this past life work. And we saw that the surgeon was female. And I looked into her history as well. It was very rare for a woman to be a surgeon. So this particular woman became a surgeon because her father was a surgeon, a barber surgeon, that is, and he trained her because he didn't have a son, and his wife died in childbirth, giving birth to her, and he never remarried, and he basically brought his daughter up, and because he had his own business, he was able to do that and raise the child as well. And that's how I became trained. But when I was about 17 years old, my father died of a disease, and I'm getting that it was probably something like cholera. And I was not quite fully trained yet, but I needed to make a living for myself. And so what I did was I made myself a codpiece. And, you know, you've got to remember this is 300 years ago. I didn't have that word. I had the word prosthesis, okay, was the word that I got when we went into this research. There were the gonads of some executed prisoner, and they were sitting in a jar of alcohol, and so I took them, and they'd been soaking there for years. I don't know what they were doing there, but they used to do that to executed prisoners, and he probably had it for, you know, doctors are funny people. They get body parts and they put them in jars. They study them, probably for anatomical reasons. But I took this and I made this prosthesis, and I dressed as a man. I went down to the dock and I passed myself off as a man, and I took the name George Wilson, and I joined the Royal Navy as a surgeon. I said that I was a surgeon, and they were always in need of surgeons at sea, and I knew that.
Hey, we'll be right back. So yeah, we're talking with Guineith Isaacs about her new book, and Guineith, please continue.
Okay. Now, so I've, this is in context here. This is talking about the early part of the 18th century, so it's the 1700s. And I was, it wasn't long that I realized that there was probably more money to be made in the merchant navy than in the Royal Navy, and so I basically, from what I can see, I did the time that I'd signed for on the Royal Navy, and then I found a merchant navy vessel to sail on, and I began to, from what I'm seeing, I began to notice that there was something not quite right with the world. Because what I'm seeing is that by the time we got to around about 1716, 1717, I would have been, not very old, still, late teens, early 20s. And I saw that there were these other guys who were sailing around on the sea who seemed to be having more fun, had more money, had more of a bit of a safe life comparatively. And so what I'm seeing is that, at some stage or other, I either found myself on the ship that Hal Davis ended up first taking, the ship that he first, mutinied on, or that I was taken soon after that. I can't quite see there which it was, but I was on Hal Davis's ship almost from the beginning. And I willingly went. I was happy to engage in that life. And what I'm seeing is that, I better do a little bit more of a backstory. I was talking to you, Vincent, earlier on today about this. When I was a little girl in this life, I saw the Jack LaLanne show as a little girl. And he was always mentioning about how he filmed the show in the Bahamas. And I was looking at this world, and I think he must have been filming it in Nassau. I was trying to see today on the internet where he filmed his show. It must have been in Nassau. And what I was seeing, I saw this place, and I was just enraptured by it. It was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And it wasn't just because it was a tropical paradise, because I was living in Rotorua, which is a resort town. And it's pretty cold for much of the year. It's not really snowing very much there. But, in New Zealand, you're in the South Pacific. You've got tropical islands everywhere. Why should this particular tropical island just jump out at me and say, and call to me from across the sea, unless that I had known that sort of thing in a past life? And of course, that's how it often goes with past lives. You see places that you had a real affection for in a past life, and especially if you see them when you're a small child, you'll turn to the people around you and you'll say, I'm from there, or I'm going to go there, I'm going to live there. So if you hear one day, Vincent, if I ever move to the Americas, I'll probably end up moving to Nassau, I think. Because, it's, I was looking at it on the internet today, and I was saying, and the people who live there and the advice that the Americans were giving about how locals shouldn't go out of about how visitors shouldn't go out of the tourist areas and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and you were talking about...
instant gut reaction was...
You're talking about Jack LaLanne. Let me spell it for you. Jack, and his last name was spelled capital L, small a, capital L, small A-N-N-E. Jack LaLanne. And his show aired from 1951 to 1985. We'll be right back after top of the hour news and commercial announcements with Guineith Isaacs. And she's talking about her new book. And we're all set. Cocked, locked, hour number 2 of the USA Prepares. Guineith Isaacs is with us. And we're talking about her new book. Guineith, please tell us some more.
Okay.
So, she said okay, and she was gone. So we just lost Guineith, and that's one of the problems that we have when we try to do these transcontinental broadcasts. Sometimes these things just happen. And by the way, Guineith lives in Australia on a farm, and it's off-grid. It's off-grid. So she's got a landline, and believe it or not, the telephone company there is really not interested in doing much maintenance on these landlines because it's difficult compared to just putting up a tower. And once they get the tower working, they've got their customers connected. And they can add more customers without adding more wires. So sometimes we do have these problems with the telephone lines. Guineith, I'm glad you're back. Please continue with... Hello,
yes. I was just saying to your engineer, it must be important for us to be having all these dropouts.
Well, okay. So. In that line of thinking, I just want to share something with you. Joey in Michigan figured this out. And, we used to have a lot more clicks on YouTube than we have now. We had really probably 5 to 10 times more at times with people clicking and listening to USA Prepares and being a student or an instructor. Well, the numbers kept dropping and dropping and dropping. And YouTube determined that we are advertiser unfriendly. So USA Prepares is not friendly to advertisers. And that's because we don't talk about important things like who has the best hamburgers, and what's the best flavor of chewing gum, and, things like that most people seem to think are important, and who threw the ball the farthest, and who jumped on who, during the game, and those kinds of things, and which way Kim Kardashian and her family is bending over. I mean, that seems to be what's really important for a lot of people. Well, our numbers kept dropping and dropping. And we're considered advertiser unfriendly because we talk about conspiracy fact. We talk about a lot of things that people don't know about. And we talk about it in detail. Well, Joey saw this, and he's absolutely right. So even though we are advertiser unfriendly, and even though it says that we have fewer and fewer people going to Ron Gibson's channel on YouTube to listen to us, they now have 12 commercials. 12 advertisements on the USA Prepares broadcast on the Ron Gibson channel. So here we are.
I noticed that. I said, mate, can they cram any more commercials into your show?
Well, that's what happened. So USA Prepares, according to YouTube, is advertiser unfriendly, but YouTube, those guys have decorated our broadcast with 12 ads per broadcast. So what is it? Are we advertiser unfriendly, or are there so many people listening that they just change the numbers to make it appear that very few people are listening, but we actually have way more than they want to admit. And I think that's the case. I think that the case is that more people are
I think
listening.
You've absolutely hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
Well, that's Joey.
I really do.
Joey is he's a really bright
yeah.
guy.
Joey, he's got it right.
Yeah.
He really has.
Yeah. So please continue. Yeah.
Yeah, I will. Now, what I'm seeing here, what I'm about to say, I am aware that it doesn't line up with what the history books say. But I would like to point out that, that the best academic researchers in the pirate research industry have determined that there were between 1,500 and 2,000, probably more like 2,000 pirates in the Caribbean during this time. We're talking about from around about 1715, 1716 to the early 1720s, so 1722, 1723. That especially during that early period, there were probably around about 2,000 pirates in the Caribbean at that time. And they were aboard maybe several hundred ships. Most of the ships we know, because most of them at some time or other were either blown up or captured by one of the navies of the world. But many of the pirates, we know next to nothing about them. Okay? George Wilson, actually we know comparatively quite a bit about George Wilson. He gets about 3 or 4 pages in Charles Johnson, a.k.a. Daniel Defoe's book, A General History of the Pirates, which is a lot, considering that a lot of pirates get a paragraph or a line about their life, and he mentions maybe several hundred pirates in that book. He would mention, I think, about probably 400 or 500 at the most, and that's out of 2,000 that were in the Caribbean at that time. So, like I said, from what I can see from my past life research, I was in the Bahamas prior to Woodes Rogers going down there and offering his pirate amnesty, okay? Because I loved the place. I loved it to such a degree that I did not want to leave. I arrived there and I fell in love with the place. And that explains why when I got to be in this life at the age of 2 and 3 years old, okay, I saw Nassau on the TV and I said, I'm going to go live there one day. And I said, Mummy, I'm going to go to the Bahamas when I'm a big girl. I'm going to live there, I know from talking to past life researchers like Norm Shealy and Richard Allen Miller, that's absolutely the sort of reaction that you would get when you get a person has lived in a place and loved it and then comes across that place as a small child in a subsequent life. So I was there, which means that the history books may not be correct when they say that George Wilson first engaged in piracy, in 1722 with the capture of the Tarleton. And if you want to know about all of this, I weave this into the book. Go and research it for yourself. I'm not going to give the whole history of Caribbean piracy in this broadcast, but it's well known. The History Channel did an excellent documentary on it a few years ago. It's called Real Caribbean Pirates. It's on YouTube. If anyone wants to know the backstory, go and watch it. What I'm saying, is that in my late teens, early 20s, that I was in Nassau. I loved the place. I didn't want to leave, but I had to work. And so through one way or another, I ended up on the ship. I can't remember if it was before I ended up in Nassau or afterwards. I ended up on the ship of Howell Davis, okay, and I was there of my own free will. I was willingly there. And so I wasn't necessarily captured, or if my ship had been captured, nobody forced me to join them. I was there of my own free will. And most of the time, when there was a battle, I would have been below deck, which explains why I'm not mentioned. Nothing's known of me at that time. But in between, making peg legs and hook hands, I was having a ball. I loved that life at that time. And, it's something where you've got to acknowledge as well in past life research. The history books are not going to capture everything. And if you're somebody who's doing past life research and you're seeing something and the history books say something else, if there are history books that, go by your life, you have to recognize that there's probably a middle ground, okay? And what I'm seeing is that I ended up on Hal Davis's ship. Hal Davis took Robert's ship. Robert ended up on the deck. And basically they were teasing him. They were offering him rum. He wouldn't drink it. And I came up to him and I said, listen, here's a bottle of water. And he took it. He thought that I was somebody else mocking him. But then he took the bottle, he opened it, he sniffed it, he had a sip of it, and then he said, thank you. And I said, oh, that's all right. And he recognized that there was something about me that was different. And from what I was seeing, he turned to me and he said, you're a sodomite, aren't you? And I said, I haven't slept with any of these men. But I couldn't help but come across as being homosexual in that life. But I didn't want to be with the men either. I was cross-dressing. But he saw something there, and we became friends at that time. And then
all right, hold that thought. We're going into a break. Guineith Isaacs is with us, and Guineith, we've been talking about your new book, and there's a link to your new book on Amazon at usaprepares.com. So, class, if you just click on usaprepares.com, one of the top posts will take you to the Amazon website. There's a link right there. Guineith, you mentioned cross-dressing. Now, what did you mean by that?
Okay. Basically, I was a woman who was wearing men's clothes and a codpiece. So I was disguising myself as a man. So I was a woman in man drag on the Caribbean as a pirate. But the interest, and if anyone thinks that that's hard to believe, it's actually historically documented that I wasn't the only woman doing this. That there were at least two other women at the time who were disguising themselves as men and working as pirates in the Caribbean, contemporary with me. And I am, of course, talking about Anne Bonny and Mary Read. And what I'm getting in my past life research is that I actually met Anne Bonny in Nassau, and I became friends with her. And it's quite interesting because I believe that I've actually met and become friends with the reincarnation of Anne Bonny where I'm living locally. And if you look at my friend's picture and you look at Anne Bonny's picture, then they are the spitting image of each other. And it's quite interesting because this particular woman, claims to be the reincarnation of another famous Anne, Annie Oakley. She used to work as a security guard, and she's an absolute crack shot. And apparently, pistols, flintlocks, were Anne Bonny's weapon of choice as well, which is quite interesting. But that's all by the by. What it's saying is that, the past life groups reincarnate together. And I'm beginning to realize that there's actually quite a group of us who knew each other in that era, friends and foes. And that we've all reincarnated and we all know each other, know of each other, and that's, that's apparently something that's quite common as well. And I'm not sure how many of these other people are aware of the fact that they reincarnated pirates, but I know that at least one of them possibly is, and that was a very good friend of my husband. And in the previous life, I won't mention his name because he is still an active gangster, but he was a very good friend of my husband, and he became a very good friend of mine as well. In his past life, I've become aware that he was a fellow by the name of Miss Nanny. That was his nickname. But I'll go into the cross-dressing, okay? I was not doing it for some weird sexual reason. I was doing it for the sake of survival, okay? And that's why I say these people who just wake up one morning and decide that they are not of the gender that God made them, they don't know what they're doing, okay? And there is a difference between somebody who is compelled by the circumstances of their life to begin acting in a certain way and somebody who wakes up one morning and decides it's a good idea. Does that make sense, Vincent?
Yeah, but I do have a question. So your current moral compass is one of honesty and integrity. How does that...
Yes.
How does that connect, tie, dovetail with a life of piracy? When we come back after the bottom of the hour break, would you share that with us? How is that possible?
I will.
What happened? What's different? What's the same? Guineith Isaacs. Guineith Isaacs is with us. Guineith, so how do we tie together your past life as a pirate and your current life as a moral woman? How do you tie that together?
Okay. It's quite interesting because one of the main things that I've been doing with this life, and one of the main things that Archie did with this life as well when he was alive, was working out our karma. I have not been left alone by people who want to, I mean, up until recently, probably the last 12 months has been all right. Basically I've been left alone for around about the last 12 months. But prior to that, I have had, government-type pirates is the only way that I could describe them. For the last, oh my gosh, it would have to be 15 or 18. It actually would have to be about 18 or 19 years trying to bust up my family, kidnap my children, prevent me from driving. It's unsafe, with the local pirates out with their thin blue line black flag. They don't fly it around here from what I've seen, but you know who I'm talking about. And you have got to be aware that if you are somebody who engages in that sort of behavior in this lifetime, there is going to be karma down the road, okay? And in this life, I have been paying off the karma because I have not been left alone to the point where I sometimes I quite literally sit down and just cry because, of thinking, well, oh my gosh, is this ever going to end? And of course, sooner or later, if you dig your heels in, if you don't give up, if you say, no, I've got my rights here, I've got my land, you're not going to bloomin' well trespass on my land, you get off my land. What's that saying that they have? Hippity hoppity, get off my property. I stole it from Count Dankula, in case anybody wants to know. But this is it. But even back in that life, in a lot of ways I was a bad person, but there were a lot of other people who were
I think we lost her again. I think, this has been difficult to maintain this connection. So let me share with you a little bit about Guineith Isaacs while we try to connect with her. Jason, I'm sure, is busy trying to make that happen. So Guineith was born in Rotorua, New Zealand in 1974. And this is directly from the directly from the Amazon page that describes her book. And there's a picture of her as a pirate. There's a picture of the front cover of her book. And you'll see that there's an About Guineith Isaacs section. And it says she was born in 1974, which makes her 45. And she grew up in a haunted house where it was common for her to see or hear the resident ghost moving about his abode. The house was well known locally to be haunted, and Guineith's father had bought the property with this knowledge as a deceased estate. Consequently, she has been keenly aware of the existence of the other world, the realm of ghosts and spirits. She moved to Melbourne, Australia in 1991 at the age of 17, where she completed her secondary education and was accepted into the University of Melbourne in 1994 to study science. She graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Science and Geography in 1999, but chose to be a full-time mother rather than pursue a career as a scientist. She now lives on a 20-acre farm in central Victoria, where she works as a professional psychic, writer, and radio broadcaster. She's the author of The Lover of the Pirate King, which is the first book ever to tell the tale of the love affair between Bartholomew Roberts, the Pirate King, and his intimate friend, pirate surgeon George Wilson. Guineith's husband, Archie McIsaac, was a retired gang leader and a Pentecostal minister who asserted that that he was the teetotaling Pirate King. During past life regressions, Guineith and Archie, her husband, saw that she was his lover, a pirate surgeon who lived in his cabin with him. So Guineith didn't fully believe the reality of these things, and she considered that very idea of teetotal pirate king was absurd. However, when her husband suddenly died, she began research of the historical background to these claims and found that they indeed were true. At the beginning of November 2018, the ghost of George Wilson began to manifest at Guineith's farmhouse. According to other incidents, he left a selfie on her cell phone, which included the photo gallery, which Guineith Isaacs used as a reference to draw his portrait, which is also in the gallery. He made it abundantly clear that he wanted the book to be written, that he wanted his story to be told, and it was written within just 9 days. And between the 2nd and the 11th of November, it was written in 2018. Guineith, I'm glad you're back with us. I was just reading from Amazon.com's page about your book and about you.
Yeah, that's right.
Would you like to continue?
You know,
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to mention, when my husband and I were doing these past life regressions, I would like to emphasize, we knew nothing, absolutely nothing about pirate history. Okay? When Archie died, about 3 months after he died, I did a Google search on teetotal pirate king, and I honestly wasn't expecting to see anything. And of course, Google was young back then in 2003, but nevertheless, there was still quite a bit of information there about Bartholomew Roberts, because he is such an important figure in the history of piracy. He took over 400 ships, everything from little fishing boats to men of war. And there were hardly any pirate ships that ever took a man of war. That Roberts did it. And it's really important to remember this, that there's no way that you could get that level of accuracy just by deciding, oh yeah, well we're gonna tell a story here, and the unlikeliness of him saying, and he didn't just say it once, he said it repeatedly and to whoever would listen. And I know because I've spoken to his friends, and they said, oh, yeah, the teetotaling pirate king. And I said, yeah, he was the teetotaling pirate king. And, I'll say just go and do an internet search on teetotal pirate king. But the funny thing is you look at Archie's photo and you look at a painting that Bartholomew Roberts had commissioned in the last year of his life, and the facial structure is there. Everything that you look for when you're doing a past life investigation, you look at the structure of the bones, you look at the shape of the brow, the eye sockets, the ears, and the hands especially. And, with Roberts, there is also a drawing that I've come across just today. I've got a really good version of it. It actually shows his legs, and it actually comes from the Dutch edition of A General History of the Pirates. And it's a drawing of Bartholomew Roberts, not just a headshot, from head to foot. And I was looking at his legs, and I was going, oh my gosh, that's Archie's legs. They look exactly the same. And it's quite interesting because Archie had very, very defined calf muscles because he had trained as an ultramarathon runner. But you look at this, and I'll put it up on my Facebook page tomorrow. You look at this drawing, and the thing that really stands out, if you look at his legs, is very, very defined muscular calf muscles. It's this sort of thing. And that's why I say it's very important for people to realize that you don't just make this sort of thing up. And, you know, it's hard for me to wrap my head around, because when I did the research, and it was the most amazing thing back in the day for me to see that it was all true, that there was this guy, and he was a teetotal pirate king, the biggest pirate of the lot, and that he held Sunday church services on his ship. And when I saw that, I said, oh my gosh, that is exactly the sort of thing that Archie would do. If he found himself on a ship with a bunch of cutthroats around him, he'd open his Bible and start preaching at them. He absolutely would. And, you know, the fact that he had a surgeon, and when I saw that he had a surgeon...
Guineith, hold that thought. Hold that thought. We're going into a break. Guineith Isaacs is with us, and we're talking about The Lover of the Pirate King, her new book. And, Guineith, I've got to ask you, maybe a different way. Are you against crime? Are you against crimes and criminals? The modern pirates, the modern pirates, the highway robbers, the police, because you were in a past life like that, but not on the highway, but on the seas?
Yeah. I know what they do. And actually, there was a previous past life where I actually was a highwayman. I think I've discussed this on your show. I was also in a prior past life. I was Catherine Ferrers. I was the wicked lady of Mark Yates' cell, and she ran a highwayman cartel. And I'm beginning to research the history behind that, and I've recently come across a document that basically says it was written by a highwayman at the time. He was on death row, and he was, Daniel Defoe managed to get a hold of his work, and he published it back in the day, or somebody in the press. I don't know if it was Defoe. It was probably a bit before Defoe's time, but it was somebody published this book that this highwayman had written, knowing that he was going to hang. So he basically wrote this about little booklet and basically spilled the beans on everything of how they were all organized. And I've seen this book in a documentary. I would love to get a hold of a copy of that book. They were highly organized, and they were operating as a cartel. And I saw this in my past life research. That's why I'm against the police, because they are doing what I did. And actually, back in the day, they were doing what we did. The only difference was that they had a license from the government and we didn't. We were all doing it. We were all doing exactly the same thing. Okay? So you think the Royal Navy is something holy and precious? No, they were knocking off ships as well of, other nations. And it got to the point where between 2/3 and 3/4 of shipping in the Atlantic was flying under false flags, simply for their own safety. That's the modern equivalent of that, is putting false number plates on your vehicle to make you more difficult to trace, and having a false name on your ship to make you more difficult to trace, simply for their own safety and protection. Because, it would be like this. If you wouldn't have any flags on your ship, and if you saw a French ship on the horizon, you'd put up the French flag if you were a merchant vessel. And if you saw a British ship on the horizon, then you'd put up a British flag. And this is what the Royal Navy and every navy on Earth was doing. They were going around knocking off the ships of the other countries. In the day, it is well documented that they were doing this. And what we were doing was partly opportunistic. okay, that we were out to make a living for ourselves, but in a lot of ways we were actually behaving in a more just and more fair way than the navies of the world were operating, because they would take ships of enemy countries, quote unquote enemy countries, and what they would do is that they would put most of it into the crown coffers, and then a fraction of it would get distributed as prizes amongst the crew. But on Robert's ship, the captain and the quartermaster got 2 shares, officers got a share and a half, and regular sailors got 1 share, and if you're on the Ranger or one of the other ships, it was a quarter share, because those were like where they trained their apprentices. Okay, so probably with the exception of Captain Skirm and the other captains, Captain Skirm was the captain of the Ranger. He would have gotten 2 shares, but everybody under him, who wasn't an officer, who was just a regular crew member, would have gotten a quarter share. And what we were doing,
we're out of time.
We were going around shutting down transatlantic slavery.